My father introduced me, and now it's my son's turn. Woodworking is a passion we'll share forever. Woodcraft understands that. Their people know the right tool for the job, and they make sure we understand how to use it. Their help? It means a lot. Woodcraft knows how we feel because they feel the same way. You know, I enjoy sharing my secrets, and now Jake's teaching me some things too. Woodcraft, helping you make wood work.
Tight Bond Wood Glues, the pro's advantage.
Hello and welcome to another episode of I Can Do That. I'm your host, Chad Stanton. And on today's episode, we're going to feature the router table. Now, this router table has been really popular and we've used it a lot here on Season 3. We've used it on projects like a tool chest, a jewelry box, and we've made drawers with it. But those videos are only showcasing a little bit of what this can do. It can do a whole lot more. And so we thought we'd take the time to show you some of the bits you can get and the things it can do for possibly a project that you might be working on at home. We're going to show you some of the bits that I like to have in my collection. You could buy a whole set, which could take a lot of money, but I prefer to buy the bits as you go and build up your own collection. So we're going to show you some of the profiles that they do, and we're going to show you some joints you can make and some jigs to do some really cool joinery. So without further ado, let's get started and show you what this baby can do. The first router bit that I want to show you in my collection is a flush cutting bit. Now let's say that you're making a pattern on your furniture and you want a nice smooth curve to it. Well, I have my pattern made out and I'm going to nail this down onto the finished piece, or what will be the finished piece. You can see that I have some pretty rough marks on there from the saw, and this bit is going to clean that up. Now, before we use any power equipment, make sure you wear your hearing protection and your, safety glasses. All right, so let me show you how this works now. The bearing is actually going to ride against this pattern, while the blade on the bit is actually going to cut it clean. So that bit does a nice job of giving you a flush cut. And you'll notice that the bearing on this one is at the bottom of this, essentially if it was turned around. You can get the same type of bit with the bearing at the top of the shank. This works great if you have a handheld router and need to do that. Some of the other bits in the collection I want to show you is this one here. We've used this a lot. It's a rabbet bit, in this case a 1/4 inch rabbet bit. And we've used this for the drawers. Again, the bearing rides against the edge and it makes the cut. And this rabbet bit did both of those joints to make the drawer there. Other ones are straight cutting bits. Now this is a 1/4 inch and this is a 1/2 inch. I wouldn't recommend going any larger than a 1/2 inch in this little router table, but they do get them in a lot larger sizes. We have a slot cutting bit, which we'll use a little bit later, as well as this dovetail bit. Here's some router bits that are for decorative. This is a bead cutting bit, and you can see I'm doing this on the edge grain, but you can also turn it to do it on the face grain. Another one is a cove bit. This makes a concave pattern on the board. One that I use a lot is a roundover. Now here's a smaller roundover And you can see that when this makes a cut and it's set very shallow, it's a very nice, soft, graceful curve. But if I set it deeper, it also makes this fillet called a thumbnail profile. And roundovers can come in different sizes. But you have to be aware of the size of the opening of the throat on your router table. In this case, this one wouldn't work. And the classic profile is an ogee. This cut actually gives you a concave and a convex curve pattern. Now the one I want to focus on next is this slot cutting one. This one bit can do two different style cuts for me. It can give me the groove on the inside of this frame, as well as make the tongue on the rail of it. So I'm going to set that up in the router and show you that. So I have the slot cutting bit set up in the router table. And this is a 1/4 inch in height and 3/8 in depth. So it's 3/8 from the edge up to this bearing. Now this bearing needs to be in line with the fence. And so you can see the bearing is just slightly rolling along with it. Now the cut that I'm making first is the groove. And when I do this, I want to make sure that I mark the outside of my work pieces, because this will be important for the next step. Okay, I'm going to go ahead now and make the groove. So the groove is done, but I'm going to use that same bit and set it up to now make the tongue, or this little tenon. Now when I set this up, I'm shooting for the middle of that, but if it's off just a little bit, that's okay. One of the reasons we marked it, and I'm going to show you that when we make this tenon. Alright, so I still have the same bit in here, but I readjusted it. I set it lower. What I'm trying to do is, I want to remove this portion on the board, which will reveal this tenon. Now, if I don't have this groove exactly in the middle, that means one side or the other is going to be fat or thin. So to help prevent that, I set this a little bit lower, and then I'm going to try sneaking up on it. Now I'm going at a 90 degrees into this, so I want to use my miter gauge. I can keep it flat against it. Also too, I have the sacrificial board on the back, because as the bit comes out of the wood, it wants to blow apart the end. And so this will help prevent that. And now I'll make the cut. Okay, let me take some sandpaper and knock off these fuzzy edges, and then we'll see how it fits. It's a little bit looser than what I would like, but I think with the glue on it is going to cause the wood to swell a little bit, and I think it'll be fine. Now, that seems like a lot of work, and you can buy these kits out there that have these matching tongue and groove sets. But this is rather large, would never fit in this router, and they're pretty pricey. So starting off, this isn't a bad way to go. All right, let me show you another style joint that we're going to do. The next joint we're going to make is what they call a finger joint. And you can see, even without glue, this makes for a very strong joint because you get a lot of glue surface in it. Now to make this, we have a 1/4 inch straight bit in it. And to make this cut, we're going to have the piece vertical. And certainly, this is not a safe way to do it right now. So we're going to make a jig for that. The jig is going to consist of a fence that's going to go all the way across the width of our router table. And we'll have a support even behind that fence. I'm going to have another support a little bit farther back because I'm going to attach a couple of rails to it. Now, when I make this, it's going to allow me to slide forward, and it's going to make a reference mark, which I'm going to use then for some other spacing and measurements to get that evenly spacing of gaps between this. So let me glue and nail this together, and I'll show you the next step. So here's the jig so far. Now, that bit I have raised up to the height of the material I'm using. In this case, it's 3/4 of an inch. Now, I'm going to make a cut into this fence. I need it to go as deep as it is wide, at this maximum point wide. So I don't have the fence on this, so keep in mind that this bit is totally exposed. So I'm always going to keep my hands off to the side here. So this is a reference mark, and I need to do a little bit of measuring for it now. So I'm going to take this out and show you that in detail. With my reference mark established, I have a few more measurements I need to do. Now I have this 1/4 inch steel square stock, which is the same size as the bit. And so I'm going to use this for my layout. So I'm going to turn this upside down just so it's easier for me to see. And I'm using a mechanical pencil because it has a sharper point to it. And I'm placing this steel square stock right at the edge where that mark is. And with my pencil, I'm drawing a line. I'm going to move it over and do the same thing again. So essentially, it's 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch, and 1/4 inch. Now in the middle of this one, I'm going to drill and put a 1/4 inch dowel pin in there. Once I get that done, I'll show you what's next and how this works. Now with the pin in place, there's still one more thing I want to do. I'm a little concerned that this might want to tip forward on me, so I'm going to put one more brace in here. And after I glue and nail that and it dries, we'll go ahead and make our cut. I have my two pieces, and the first piece, I'm going to place it against the fence and up to that 1/4 inch dowel pin. I'll put a clamp on here to hold it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this on and push the workpiece into it, and it's going to make that notch. And every one then I'm going to pick it up and put it over on the dowel pin and make another one until I go across the whole board. Okay, now because this has a full pin, I'm going to put this back in place, hold it with a clamp. And now my second piece is going to go right up against that with another clamp. And I'm going to make my cut, and what it's going to do, it's going to give me the opposite pattern of this one. All right, let me move this out of the way and see how it fits together. A nice fit. But there's a couple of things to pay attention to. It's important to know the orientation of how you cut this. For example, if I flip this around, it'll still fit, but you can see that my ends aren't flush. That's because this board wasn't wide enough for the exact 1/4 inch spacing all the way across, so the one pin is a little bit shy. Keep that in mind when you're making your cuts on the board. The other thing to keep in mind is, as you're placing this on here, it's pretty easy to clamp it a little bit off, and that will screw up the whole joint. So again, make sure that you're nice and square to the table. All right, I've got another joint to show you, and it's really slick and cool, so let me get that out here for you. The next joint we're going to make is some dovetails. Well, not exactly. Some would call them mock dovetails. It's actually a dovetail key that slides through this at 45 degrees. Not only does it look good, but it's a strong joint. So to do this, I of course need a dovetail bit in here. And unlike the other joint that we did, we raised the bit up to the height of the workpiece. Not so in this case. This has to be raised up enough to clear through the jig. The jig is going to hold our workpiece in at 45 degrees. And this piece is already mitered and glued together. Now the height of that bit, as I said, is important. And I know that it's 3/4 of an inch. But to get that, I made a cool little jig. It's just a scrap piece of wood with a couple of screws, and the screws allow my combination square to fit in there. Now my 2-inch mark is actually my 0 in this case because it's flat with the tabletop. I know I want this bit up 3/4 of an inch. So I'll move this, lock it down, and now I can raise my bit up to hit that bottom of the combination square. Okay, let's take a look at the components of the jig. The cradle is just some 1/4-inch wood, and I've took some scraps of some 1x4 and cut them at 45 degrees. This will get glued together. Now it doesn't really matter if the ends are a little bit long on it. What matters is that this is at 90 degrees in there. I took another piece of 1x4, again cut it at 45 degrees, and this will get glued to it just to give it some stability, make it more of a flat surface. Then a couple of rails are glued and nailed on it, and of course another front brace to keep it from tipping. All right, let me get it set up in here and I'll show you how this makes the cuts. So I have my mitered sample piece here, and I took some time to do some layout lines where I want those dovetails to be. I went with some even spacing on it, but you can put whatever spacing you want in between them. Also too, on the jig, I have a pencil line here which gives me the center of that bit. So now I can take my pencil marks and line them up with my mark. All right, I'm going to put a clamp on this. I'm going to turn it on, make the pass, and keep making the cuts till I have all 4 dovetail slots made. So you can see that I got my dovetail slot all the way through it, and then a dovetail key will go through it. Now, cutting these slots, that was the easy part. Making this key, that's a little bit trickier. So let me set it up and show you how to do that. Okay, this setup is pretty important, and I have a flashlight here because it's easier to see. I have this dark wood and I'm dealing with the red router bit, so this is going to help me out a little bit. The first thing I want to do is I want to find the center of my workpiece. Now the workpiece then, the center mark, should fall at the center of the router bit. The next thing is I want to make sure that the bit is raised enough so that all of the cutting edge is exposed. All right, now I'm going to turn this on, and I'm just basically going to push this in just to make that profile. That's going to help me with the actual setup to make the key. All right, now I'm going to reset up the fence and show you how that is going to help me make the key. I've readjusted the fence, and if you look real closely, I have the top tip of that bit coming to the outside of that socket cut that I made. Now, hopefully I left that a little heavy. So I'll make the pass, turn it around, make the other pass, and then I'll test the fit. If it's a little heavy, well, I can use my adjuster, make a slight tap on the fence, which would move it in, and make another pass. Okay, clearly this dovetail is too big. I really need to move that in some more. But what I'm shooting for is I'll keep nibbling down until the dovetail key slides right in. Now, the tricky part is cutting that off. So if you have access to a table saw, that would be ideal. But for our show, I Can Do That, we don't have that ability. So I'm going to have to take a handsaw and cut that down. Or if I had this piece really long, I could clamp it to my table and use a jigsaw to try and cut that off. Once I get this fine-tuned and cut off, I'm going to show you how we put it in and make it look really beautiful. So placing the key in is no problem. I'm just going to place a little glue inside the socket. I'll place a little on the key itself. You want these snug, but not too tight. You certainly don't want them loose. And then when that dries, I can take my saw, cut that flush, and then sand it so it looks just like that one. One last point with these jigs. On the dovetail jig, this is very simple to make, but the tricky part is making the key. It takes a little bit of finesse to get that to fit just right. And on the finger joint jig, it's really important to get the spacing just right. If it's off a little, well, those joints and fingers are not going to fit. Overall, I think you'll find that the router table is a very versatile tool. It will improve your woodworking, help you make more projects, and overall, I think you'll find a lot of enjoyment in exploring what this can do. Come back next time to another episode of I Can Do That and see what we're making.